Hello, welcome back to the podcast. I am going to take you through an ancient land portal, and this has to do with my trip to Peru. I am going to break up my Peru experience and trip into a few different episodes based on which portal you would like to go through. So this one specifically is through the land and my communication with the land, the sites that I had gone to and different experiences that I had felt and different messages from these lands that I had received. And the first, and I think I might put together this in like a blog post of what my itinerary was, because this is a side, not even a side passion, because it is affiliated with my mission and current passion of travel and what I'm here to do with the land and speak with. And anyways, so one of my really like favorite things to do is create itineraries and plan a trip. And so I essentially created this whole itinerary and trip for my grandma and I to go on to Peru. We spent a little bit over 2 weeks there. We went to 3 different cities and connected with the land in 3 different aspects. So I won't touch on really what else we had done or what my experience is traveling with my grandma in this episode. We're just going to talk about the land. So I get there and we immediately go into Lima. It's really the only international airport like from the States. I think it's like anywhere else you're going to travel to, you're going to probably go to Lima first. And so we decided to I decided to stay in Lima for a few days and look at those kind of like stay in the city, get the city vibes. I'm going to tell you overall, the country as a whole in itself, like the land altogether, was extremely peaceful, extremely like quiet, and like, it's very difficult to describe. Like I kept on like turning and thinking like, it's so quiet, so peaceful. Like here I am in like the main city, really big city of Lima. And I feel such a sense of like peace and serenity. I mean, we're right along the coast. So the ocean's there, the water energy's there, but it felt very peaceful. And before I had gone to Peru, I had known that there was a few sites that I wanted to see. And one of the sites, I had watched an episode actually of Unexplained, season 3, I think episode 1. Don't quote me on that. I might be able to find exactly which one. It talked about this area in Peru that was a new recent archaeology find. Like, I'm obsessed with ancient land. I think there's so many hidden codes within these lands and the stones and the sites there. I think we have had ancient civilizations that, the modern history right now, or the take right now on history is that we are the most civilized, we are the most advanced that we've ever had, and before us, our history, our ancestors came from cavemen. And I just call bullshit on that. I absolutely don't believe this at all. Don't think that we originate that way, as you know, or if you're just tuning in, I think that we're a mix of a lot of different species, especially certain people. We're starseeds. We have had multiple civilizations before us that have been extremely advanced, more than us, in different aspects. So we might have more spiritually advanced. There might have been more technologically advanced. So we have these different civilizations that have been lost, that as some have actually happened and occurred on Earth. It just really hasn't been talked about. It hasn't been explored enough, but now it's beginning to, which is really exciting. One of my favorite series that really explores these ideas in a very factual, scientific way, and actually just prosing like questions for us to think about, is Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix. And so if you haven't watched that, definitely watch Ancient Apocalypse. There, and this is how you can tell if land's like calling to you, if you're like specifically interested in a place, if you get really excited about learning about something. But as I've watched some of those episodes and series, there's a few different locations that completely just like reach out to me. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I want to go there. Oh my God, that's amazing. It's so cool. And when you have those like feelings or you have those thoughts, it's definitely the land that's communicating with you. And I have talked about this in previous episodes. And there is a specific energy exchange that happens. You get codes and the land gets codes. You mix energies together and something really beautiful happens. Maybe not something that you completely understand. Maybe something that you're not aware of. Maybe it's not something you truly feel yet, but it does happen. It's the same thing when you meet somebody like a friend or a new lover or whatever, and you just like, you get together and your energies mix and you're like, oh my gosh, something else completely happens. Like we get off on a tangent. I get more energy. I feel this way, or I feel activated in this way. I feel inspired to do X, Y, and Z. And this is what land does for us also, because we have relationship with Earth. Earth is a sentient being, and we have different aspects on her activate us. So I felt this watching one of the episodes of Unexplained, and he was talking about a recent dig, and shit, I forget her name right now. But this archaeologist, was exploring an area 4 hours north of Lima to a land called Caral, 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 Peru. And she found these different mounds that was like kind of suspicious. And she's like, okay, this isn't sand dunes. This isn't anything that's like, seems like it'd be nature made. And so she started to excavate and like dig up these different areas, dig up these mounds. And she found like these stone, like pyramid structures. And lo and behold, it dates back to like 5,000 years, like insane. So it's in the middle of this valley and also like desert kind of environment. So let me tell you, from flying into Lima, and I know that it was going to be a journey to get there. It's 4 hours away from Lima. You can't fly there. We booked a tour. Anytime that I go to a place, I love booking day tours. Like I don't put myself on like a tour schedule or join tour group, because I love to be very specific with how I travel, and I like to honor how I feel and what I want to do. But really good ways to see these sites is like do these day tours. So you can use different apps like I think TripAdvisor has some stuff, but I like to get Your Guide. It's an app, and you can literally search the city that you're in or the thing that you want to do, and there's a bunch of day tours that can pop up. I always go based off of like review, like, so just be cautious of like, if there's a tour that's like, I don't know, like however expensive it is, but there's like no reviews, just kind of, I always be a little bit leery on that. So definitely like to see the reviews and make sure the guide is a thing and it is going to actually pick you up and whatnot. So after I booked this tour, it was pretty much a 4-hour drive journey. So we were picked up, usually it's a group, like sometimes you'll be in a bus or whatnot, but this was actually, I didn't pay for, and it wasn't advertised as a private tour, but essentially was. It was me, my grandma, the driver, and the tour guide. And so our tour guide was able to give all this information about kind of the history of Peru and the history of this site and like what they came to find. And one of my favorite ways to really acclimate to the city that I'm at and get familiar with the land is like go on a walking tour. So this is separate, but we first went on a walking tour of Lima before we did this Caral tour. And it really gave me more of an idea of like, okay, these are the different sites. This is kind of piecing together some of the history for me. I'm kind of more aware of what the energy feels like within myself and what I'm feeling with the land. And so then we're on this journey, they pick us crack of dawn, super early. We're traveling outside of Lima, of the city. And so we're seeing the edges of the city, which I really enjoy seeing all aspects of different countries and areas that I am in. So we were able to see kind of what people lived like and what life is like on the edge of the city and even in the rural areas. So as we further continued to like go farther out, it started to get more and more like desert-like, sand-like, not really any trees. And we were kind of asking like, what happened? Like what? And she said pretty much agriculture, it's kind of what destroyed these areas. They started chopping down all of the trees, planting lots of crops and farms. And then all of a sudden you start to lose the whole kind of cycle of nature, and things just started to turn into sand. So then I think about the different areas and pyramids that like are in Egypt, and previous in Egypt, we know like there was water out there. And so it just kind of makes me wonder how much land can change, and how we, in some desert areas, say when I visited Uluru in the middle of Australia, like in those desert mountains, there were fossil remains. And we know this to be true of like just earth changes, different cycles change, and it's just a natural thing. So when we think, oh my God, global warming and all this stuff, it's like, it's a natural occurrence of earth to change her landscape. So, that could be quickened, or things can happen differently with sometimes humans kind of come in, but different subject. So we get to Caral, and it's super desert. It's super foggy on the way. And so we're like, where are we going? It's like kind of off-roading. It is a very new site. She started digging like in 1993. It's like 1996, like they found it. And she, from what I had learned, this archaeologist like really like kind of did it herself in a way where like people were kind of getting after her. She had to have guards. It was like this whole thing of her like doing this dig, because in a lot of ways that if you start to question the way that things have been told or done, you get a lot of kind of pushback from that. You trigger a lot of people. You trigger certain systems and the stories that have been told to us. And if you question one thing, then it gives room to question a whole lot of other stuff. So this is kind of what happened to her, and what happens to the Ancient Apocalypse story or series, what he ran into too, of like, I'm just posing a question that would be something different, where maybe history has happened differently than what we actually think. And that causes a lot of issues for people. So this site shows 5,000 years ago, humans have built these structures. They know how to do these things. They know how to build all this stuff. So it's kind of like everything that we thought that we knew might actually be different, because how would cavemen back in the day have the knowledge and the skill to build these structures? Because the structures weren't even like, they were impressive themselves, but they were also very uniquely like specific on astrology, like the sun aligned with Sirius. Like all of these ancient older places have such like they're just one of the center focuses is astrology. Like we all know that they're all looking up and comparing themselves to the stars. So it's like, what is that relationship currently? And it's funny because like we have these new waves of like new age stuff, or we have astrology that's really popular, and we're like, oh my God, like, oh, if she's into astrology, then get prepared or whatever, which is just like fucking hilarious, because astrology is like an OG thing that people have been studying for years, and it's a very specific science, and it's like a lot of the things that I think are very powerful, especially in our human past, can be very boiled down to being like a joke, like, oh, don't take this seriously. These woo-woo people are into the energies, and astrology is just like some shit people make up, and it's like actually very scientific. And all of the ancient cultures are looking up to the stars and knowing how to tell when the solstice comes based on the sun, and anyways, very specific. So that just like gives a little bit more information to like what we were back in the day. This is all of our history. And I think when we identify so much with a certain religion, a certain culture, where we're from, a certain country, we specifically say like, oh, this is where I'm from. This is what happened to my people. This is my history. And yes, that's true. Maybe you have more information in your genetic code based on those things. Get that? You also have things in your genetic code that is from the stars, from being in different galactic lineages. But then also you have like the whole humanity within yourself too. You have the whole universe within yourself. So when you're thinking back to like these ancient lands, it's not that this is outside of you. Like it's my history as well as it is somebody that is from Peru. It is the whole collective story. Like we have to know all of the chapters to really understand what the whole story is. And it's just this new thing that has awakened within myself. Maybe it's just somebody in your 30s that is now like more interested in history, or like maybe it's like, yeah, maybe it's like age, maybe it's energy, but it's like this whole new interest that has like kind of probed me. And I guess it's not specifically new because I have been interested in these things once I had had my awakening. And I just remember, and I don't know if you've had this experience, like I remember being like history was a really difficult, hard, painful subject for me. Like absolutely hated my history class. Like hated all my history professors, never could remember any dates, never could remember like the story of what happened and why. I just like couldn't get it to stick. Like it just did not make sense. And now like fast forward, it just like it makes so much sense that I had so much like it just I was resisting all of this like fake information and one-sided story. I mean, we know that this happens. Like it's not something that's like just brought up in thin air. Whoever wins, their story is told. So you really only we've only really received one side of the story first for different things that had happened, wars, battles, reasons for things. We're kind of fed what we're told. The history that we're told in America is different than the history that is told from other countries. It's just one side that is told. And then you take another whole aspect and you zoom out galactically and get to see like actually what the energy was even beyond that. So that's what gets really interesting. So the land there was specifically very like, again, peaceful, recharging, like hold your ground kind of energy. They had eventually the story of it is that like something was changing within that area. So they believed that the people that had lived there had to move on and had to like go to a new place because their resources were like being dried up essentially. And it just kind of goes back to like honoring the change, honoring the time that prompts like, oh, it's time to move on. It's time to go to a new land. And I think we resist a lot of those things. Like we resist ending relationships. We resist moving. We resist these bigger changes. And I believe that when that is up and things are complete and done in that area, it is only with honor, and it is only like the only route is to continue to honor that and to change with that. Like if you feel like it's time to move and you don't move, you're not really honoring the land, yourself, God, source, or yourself. It's just like you're doing it all a disservice. And so that's when things like really start to go wrong. And you feel that when you're like, oh, I should have done this. And then all these bad things happened. And you're like, how can God, live in a world like this? But it's like, if you were to listen to your first intuitive nudge and the synchronicity and like listen to the land, would that have happened if you honored that first call? So anyways, that's a side note. But so that's what I had gotten from Caral, like very peaceful, honor the change. Very just smart. Like I felt very like recharged in a way where it's like, it feels like knowledge was just there, like just very like made my brain tingle. Like knowledge was just like, in the areas. And so it's really interesting to like walk around this site. Since it's so new and just not popular at all. Like it's only been up for like nearly 20 years. And that's very young for like a site to be discovered like that. It takes a lot of momentum and time. There's still a ton of areas that needs to be explored and excavated. Even when we were driving from the site, like around the surrounding area, there was like at least 10 to 15 more mounds that I've that I saw with my own eyes that's around. So like, this area was just huge, and it takes a lot of resources, time, like money and support to do these things, because you're 4 hours out in this terrain. And so the whole site was like, not that it felt put together, but it was like just new. It was baby. So there was a kind of a welcoming center, and gave you more of a story of the people that were digging and the archaeologists that had really started this and found it, and gave you a little bit of history of what they think. They actually found like a lot of different like artifacts of like in the homes of netting and things like that. So it kind of, that helps date things and think about like, oh, they knew to insulate. They had paint on the walls and had all this stuff. So that was really cool. And we were like the only ones there, like walking about. There was one school trip that had came there about the end of our tour. So we had our guide and a personal guide that was speaking to us. That was a part of the whole mission and the dig. And our guide was translating, because he was speaking Spanish, and my grandma and I didn't, we don't speak Spanish. So she was translating for us to really know and try to understand what had happened. And they had this huge amphitheater. And you see this in a lot of sites where they have some sort of ceremonial area that is usually in a circle. There's one area that I saw that was different, but typically they're in a circle. It was a whole amphitheater of like seats above, in the middle, massive structure. And so we got to see that site, and that land was pretty incredible. And even in Peru along, like there's so many sites that exist. Because the next site I want to tell you about is the big one, Machu Picchu. And there are so many sites around Peru and in the mountains that haven't even been discovered or popularized. So it's like so much exists out there. And it's even more of like the information that like exists that's out there that we haven't explored yet. And sometimes when we get in this mind frame of like, oh, this is all I know, this is all I see, this is to be truth. And we can get in a mindset of like, that's what it is, and just have our blinders on. But we don't know what we don't know. So when we start to discover and think like, oh, maybe what we did know was only half or a fraction of what actually is truth. So Machu Picchu was discovered by an explorer, actually from the United States. He lived in Hawaii. And he wasn't even an archaeologist. He was literally just an explorer interested in these sacred lands of rumors that he had heard that there was like these stones and sacred places in the mountains. Because at this time, which was like, I was putting together like the pieces of this, because you had civilization in Peru that they're aware of, have artifacts in all of this that were pre-Inca. And then the Incas conquered these people in the mountains and say like, okay, now we're taking over. Now we're in charge. And after the Inca kind of destroyed these people, then the Spanish came in and conquered the Incas. And they're like, okay, no, now we're in charge. And this is like a classic thing of history. It's like one conquers the other's the slaves now. And so they became the slaves. And so it's like all this kind of jumble of history. So a lot of the things that you can visually see now in Peru is the work of the Spanish. So you see a lot of Spanish influence, and it's difficult to kind of see exactly what was going on, because a lot of the culture and language was essentially just destroyed when the Spanish came in, and maybe even the Incas. So it's difficult to say. So this explorer was looking for a different site, and the people were like, oh yeah, there's something up that mountain you can kind of go discover if you want. Because when the Spanish came in, they essentially was like, either convert Catholic or die. It was like the cross in one hand and the knife in the other. And that is described as what the history was. It's just like you had to convert. So this is like 1700s, 1800s. So they came in and really just said, like, the only connection and the only sacred place is in the church. Like, you need to just leave all of these sites. So they did, they were like, okay, like, no choice but to survive. And so all of these were really just abandoned and forgot about and not even considered sacred or important or even anything. So they just like stopped viewing it as such. So when the explorer came in, he was the one that like kind of popularized it in 1910, like 1911. And so he was like, holy shit, there's a whole city on top of this mountain. This is insane. Like, let's take a million different photos, which he did. And he excavated it and removed artifacts from this and all this kinds of stuff. And now it's like a huge production, which it is. You feel that so many people, when you think about Peru and sacred sites, like the only thing that comes to mind is probably Machu Picchu. And you see that classic photo stage of the Machu Picchu in the background, and like they're like just posing in the front. And so I thought once I had gotten there, it was going to be a very small area. Like, I didn't think that you could walk through it. I thought that you can only see it from above because that's all I saw in everybody's like shots in the classic Machu Picchu shot. And so this whole process to get there. So this is the third city we were in. It's the city of Cusco. And you have to fly to Cusco. There's a few different ways to see this. So you can stay in the town that's a little bit closer, but we traveled specifically from Cusco as like a day trip. So it was a very long journey to get there. I'm not even going to sugarcoat that. It was like a 2-hour bus ride first to get to the train, and then we took a train for an hour and a half to another bus that was up the mountain, maybe about an hour-ish, 45 minutes or something. And then we got to Machu Picchu. And then you stood in line and you got a guide. So we had a guide that walked us through the whole thing. And we actually got to walk through the city. So I saw the classic shot. We have a great picture. And then we got to continue to walk through the city, which was way bigger than I thought it was going to be. And the awe of what I had of this place was just insane. Like, it wasn't even the fact that like these whole structures were built, and it was just a massive city in itself. It was like on top of this epic mountain that was like so high up. I can't even imagine thinking about how to trek up there and get up there and live there. So the running theory is that it was a city that was built from above, from like a viewpoint. It actually is in the same shape of a condor, which is very important because they had believed the condors, which is a bird, they were the messengers of God because the condor flew above the clouds and they viewed it as very sacred and that it was their connection to the upper world. So in Peru, of the ancient artifacts, Inca, pre-Inca, all like back in the day, they just believed that there were 3 different worlds and they're all connected and we are all connected to them in different aspects. So the upper world, and I could dive into this in a different episode, but we'll just get there since we're here. The upper world is viewed as the bird, the condor, any kind of flying animal that's like connected to spirit. Then you have the human. The puma is in the middle world, which is earth. So that is how we are connected into being on earth. It's earth realm. They call it middle world. And then lower world, hidden knowledge, and yeah, basically hidden knowledge is kind of what they say, is snakes. So sometimes you'll see a combination of all 3 animals mixed into like one ceramic. Like, it'll all be 3 because they honor all 3 because they're all in communication. So the city itself is in shape of a condor, which is also impressive. And then the city, they estimate that about 1,000 people lived in this town, but then they didn't finish making it because there was some earthquake that had happened. And that was a sign from the gods to leave. So they essentially abandoned this huge city. Maybe they went on another mountain in a different site that we don't know of yet. I'm not sure. They don't really know. They did find a lot of artifacts though, silver and all this kind of stuff, that they were able to kind of date things and, you know, find out more things about the civilization. And they were all still there because the mountain was so far up that the Spanish didn't come and steal it. Because in a lot of the sites that I had seen was they were all stripped from all of their gold and silver from the Spanish because they melted it down and took it back to their country. So there could be a lot more artifacts that could have existed to tell us a little bit more about these people if they didn't steal that. So that's a bummer. Yeah. So once we get there and we're walking around and it's just like so overwhelming in this way of like seeing this view and you're just like, just a little bit cliff off this, like just cute. Like I've traveled a lot, but I have never seen mountains in this way that were like just mounds. Like you just, and I love feeling this because I think it gives you a lot of perspective that it just made me feel so small in such a good way. Like I'm just like looking at this landscape and it's just powerful. Like I can't imagine just waking up and living there, like seeing those views and being a part of this community. What's interesting is that they think whoever it was, a ruler or we'll just leave it at that. If a ruler possibly had lived at the base of one of the base of the mountains, because it was the only place that had like indoor plumbing, kitchen, house, but it had no windows, so it was super protective. So they think whoever ruled this area lived there at the base of it. And they just kind of structured everything to be like tiered from the mountain to help prevent like erosion and also earthquakes. So they had things that were shaped in the trapezoid to be more sturdy and such. So we're walking through and we have this guide that's telling us all these theories of, oh, they think that this place was used for this and this place was for this, and did a really great job about presenting a few different theories and why people were arguing something different. And it just was powerful. It was a hike though, so I'll review this in a different episode where it talks about more of the traveling. But we took an easier route where we're not trekking up the whole mountain. We took the bus from the train, but it also was a bit of a hike to walk through the city. There was big rocks and mounds and things to kind of climb and watch your step, and not even that. It was the altitude adjustment too that could be that you just had to be aware of and that you felt, and you had to take time as you were doing these things to like catch your breath. And so the land there was just impressive. I felt borderline anxiety there. I felt like not that I was ready to leave, but it just felt so like energetically charged. There's a lot of people visiting, so it could be part of that. There's been more people on that site than the first site in Caral, so it could be just the imprint energetically there that I had felt. Could be also the people previously there that was inhabited it, and I felt like maybe their anxieties of having to leave. It just felt a little bit more unsettling than the Corral spot. Felt way more peaceful, even though that place was like, felt like it was in the middle of nowhere and it was more like sandy and such. Machu Picchu is very lush and green and the mountains are alive and flourishing. And so that was an interesting place. It felt, just like very, very powerful. And even what I had felt like, that was a specific place that my grandma had wanted to go. And afterwards, she was just like, I knew there was a reason why I had to be there. Like, I feel so energetically charged. So it's cool to kind of get like other people's perspective of like what you felt versus what I felt. And she's not really attuned to those things. Like, she's not really interested in the energies. She knows that, I am. So we did talk about it a little bit, but for her to even say that she was like energetically charged was just like a big thing. And a lot of it was the energy I was sending her, getting through that hike and stuff. But the land itself and the structures, and that place actually had an amphitheater too. The amphitheater, though, was square, or no, it was a rectangle. And there is like just a huge stone that was supposedly was in the middle of it. I think also representing the stars and the sun and looking at the shadow to see what time of day it is. And unfortunately, that was also removed by Spanish because I think one of the rulers back in the day wanted to like come and land there with a helicopter. I don't know. Must have been recent enough to have a helicopter, but they had to remove the stone in order for the helicopter to land. So, anyways, yeah, so there's like a lot of history there that has the different theories, and honestly, I think that's what history should be considered more instead of like, oh, these are the facts, but like this is the interpreted theory that is running, and that's honestly what history should just be like. It's not matter of fact because we don't know all sides. We don't know actually what happened. We don't know what happened before that. So I think that history should just be known as, oh, this is the running theory until we get some more information. And unfortunately, that's just not how it is right now. It's very like tight and rigid on their theories. And I definitely felt that in some of the information that I had like received from museums and things. And it's really easy to piece together that there might be an alternative story here underneath everything when you are kind of awake and aware of things, because you're like, wait a minute, I know this about my own history in America, so there's got to be some sort of edge here that might not be all the way true. And I was already starting to question, like, wait, because I only thought about Peruvians, like ancient Peruvians, as being Incas, but I was like, wait, who was here before the Incas? Because then they said pre-Inca, and that's when I was able to be like, wait a minute, they must have conquered. They weren't the ones that were living on the land and maybe connected to all these things. And that's what our guide at Machu Picchu had like kind of confirmed, where he was like, do you think the Incas were nice? Do you think the Incas had to conquer? And so he gave a whole nother side of possibly what had happened in history, because he was one of the original people in that land and spoke Quechua, which is one of the original Peruvian languages. There was a lot of different Peruvian languages at one time. And then they ultimately had to all kind of start speaking Spanish. So some of the areas like the Amazon, different areas of Cusco still speak one of their native languages of Quechua. And I don't know what the other ones, that's the only one that I kind of remembered because it's such a fun name. But yeah, so you just don't really know until you start questioning and open yourself up to different findings. So that was also the message of that land too, was just being open to what you find, specifically in the outside world, but also what you find internally. What things that you get to discover within yourself. Maybe at one point you thought that you were just this, and then all of a sudden you find out something else. And it's being open to receive that information and not be like, oh, this is it. This is fact. This is what I know to be true. Because truth can be very broad, and truth doesn't mean that it's just one view. There's multiple views, and all views can be in truth. So that is kind of summing up those different aspects. So that's the message. That's more of the messages just from the land of the trip and the certain sacred sites. One other thing I want to mention, a third site that I'll wrap up this, is the Temple of the Sun. And that is even said to be even more sacred than Machu Picchu or any of the mountain villages that had existed. Was this Temple of the Sun. It was actually in the middle of Lima. And wait, no, not Lima, of Cusco. I misspoke there. It was in the middle of Cusco. And the church was built on top of this site. So it was like a mix of Spanish Catholic Church and also Sacred Sun pre-Inca buildings. And this place, why they considered it so sacred is that it was over a river. So when sun and water are present, it's sacred because those are the key aspects of life. They are the life givers. can't have civilization or life without sun and water. And they knew this back in the day. And so they had these temples that were built, again, in the trapezoid shape. And they're smooth. Like, I'll have to try to do I'll put together a blog post, or you also can look on my personal Instagram of these. But the stones were smooth. And so they're still trying to find out theories of how they actually shaped these stones and got them so smooth. But they didn't use any grout, mortar, concrete, anything. It's just literally walls of stone on top of stone, and they're kind of like locked in. So they kind of grooved them to be able to actually be so sturdy and not need anything to like glue them together. And this was a site where they had multiple different temples. Like, one was a temple of the stars, the other was a temple of the rainbow, of lightning, of the moon, and of the sun. And those were like what they worshiped. And yeah, it feels sometimes and this is my experience when I go, say, like into Catholic churches or churches itself, like, you do feel energy, you feel the prayer that's there, you do feel it being holy and kind of sacred in this certain way. But it feels very, not that it's fake, but it just feels very, yeah, just very man-made. And I'm not saying that there's not like magic and God in those areas, because there is. But when you go to these different sites that are from the earth and, from rock, and they are connected so much to worshiping nature and finding God in nature, it just is so much more powerful and impactful for my own field, and just this whole different resonance that I feel, because it's like we all are within the universe, and we are all aspects of God in a way, and we have it within us. And so when you're worshiping these different aspects of like nature, it just feels so connected. And in this areas of this stone just felt so connected to earth and to all these aspects that we get to sometimes fear in a way. We're very like fearful of like Mother Nature, what it can do to lightning, to storm, to these things, but it's actually more things that we can actually worship. So it's a similar but different feeling of what you feel of the same sacredness, the same energy of God and holiness that feels just almost like cleaner, like a cleaner energy source from these areas, from touching the stone, rather than being in a closed church that's like covering all of that. So don't know if you have experienced that from a stone site, or had visited a sacred site that's more ancient, or where you get the most energy in worship, or where you feel God the most. But that was another interesting thing that I had felt, where it was just like a connectedness feeling in those areas, which was pretty incredible. So those are the 3 land spots that were very, I guess, the most powerful and impactful and invigorating, and just recharging. Like, I had to go to those sites for an energetic exchange. I still don't know completely how much. I've only gotten a fraction of the messages from that, and I know they will continue to deliver to me, which obviously I will continue to update the podcast as I unravel this, because Peru and going to this land was just this next step in the map that I'm in of Latin America and South America, and I get to explore another spot pretty soon. So this is piecing together something for you and I am a happy one to put this together for us all to learn. Because, and this is why I love stories and why I love sharing, and that we get to learn so much through each other, where you might not need to go out and go to all of these sacred lands and go to Peru and go to these sites. You might have an intuitive nudge to be like, oh, I want to do that too. And that's super cool. But you can also receive all of the lessons and the energy that I have from these sites by listening to the stories and picking up what resonates, and watching out what kind of lights up or what excites you about those different aspects. And you will be delivered that information through me telling the story, which is so cool. We don't have to go through every single experience that everybody goes through to be able to get the information or the lessons or the codes. So that's the cool thing about mirroring each other. So I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. If this feels really powerful for you, or you think someone that would be interested in these sacred sites, you can totally send the episode to them. Feel free to like and subscribe to the show. It would be super helpful to grow the show. And until then, I will see you in the next episode.